Hello, and welcome to episode number 82 of WrestleRotica, the podcast that combines wrestling with erotica. This week we have two stories to share with you. The first story is entitled, Miss Nitro 2000. In this story, Kevin Sullivan is desperate to increase the ratings of WCW. He decides that the solution is to increase the amount of TNA in his shows. He decides to hold the first ever Miss Nitro 2000 contest with participants Kimberly Page, Medusa, Daphne, Spice, and Tori Wilson. The second story is entitled Pass the Gravy. In this story, after a grueling Gravy Bowl match, Trish Stratus is approached in the locker room by her opponent, Stacy Keibler. Trish continues to throw out advances to Stacy before Stacy finally realizes what is going on, and the two quickly head to the showers to wash up from their match and then have some fun. Without further ado, let's get to this week's stories. This story is entitled Miss Nitro 2000, and it was written by Wonder Mike. Kevin Sullivan knew he was in serious trouble. World Championship Wrestling had sunk to an all-time low. He had screwed over Vince Russo and got himself and Terry Taylor put in charge. Now Taylor had gone behind his back and was ready to be named head honcho. Sullivan knew there was one thing that could get the fans back: TNA. He called Kimberly Page, Daphne, Spice, Medusa, and Tori Wilson into his office. He told the girls he wanted to crown a Miss Nitro at Super Brawl. It would be pay-per-view, so anything goes. It worked for the World Wrestling Federation, so it would work for them. Sullivan told them there would be a $50,000 bonus to the winner. He told them to do whatever it takes to get over. He told them the audience would decide the winner. Medusa screamed, "I am not eye candy, and I refuse to take part in this. I am a wrestler." Daphne just smiled. She knew this was her chance to become a huge star. Kimberly told Sullivan she would do whatever it takes. Tori didn't think she had any competition. Spice, of course, was also more than confident. The night of Super Brawl, the girls met once again with Sullivan. They wanted to be clear that anything goes. Sullivan assured them that it did, and the winner would become a huge star. They drew lots to see who would go first. Tori Wilson grabbed number one. She walked into the Cow Palace and saw a crowd of about 3,000 people. They were on their feet screaming her name. She was wearing a thong bikini bottom with a white t-shirt that was tied in a knot exposing her flat stomach. Tori began to parade around the stage. She then ran her hands underneath her shirt and began to massage her perfectly shaped hurt breast. She then grabbed a bottle of water and poured it all over her chest. She pinched her nipples through her shirt until they became erect. Tori then lifted the shirt up over her breast and exposed them to the delight of the crowd. She then leaned over and licked them. Tori dropped to all fours, pointing her ass at the audience. She began to wiggle it back and forth. She then slid the thong bottom over to one side, exposing her asshole to the fans. She then jumped up and ran off the stage to a standing ovation. Spice had drawn number two. She was scared since Tori had gotten a standing ovation, but she was determined to become the number one female in the wrestling business. Spice was wearing a green bikini thong with a matching top. She ran bouncing and skipping across the stage to a rousing ovation. She stopped directly in front of the first row and stood with her arms outstretched. She slowly twirled around until her back was to the audience. She then slowly began to bend over. She knew she had a top-flight ass, and she would use it. She began to switch her ass cheeks back and forth.
What?
She then stood up straight and twirled around until she was once again facing the crowd. Spice then slipped her hands inside her bikini top. She then ripped it off, using her hands to cover her tiny breasts. She cupped her nipples until they were poking out between her two fingers. She then spun around again. She then called to her best friend and fellow Nitro girl Cheyenne. Shay had a water hose with a spray attachment. She began to spray Spice's chest until her top was soaked. And the outline of her perfect nipples shone through. Spice outstretched her hands again, then turned so she was once again facing the audience. They gasped as they stared at her exposed breast. Spice then began to slap her thumbs against her giant nipples. Spice then spun around again, so her back was to the crowd. She pulled down her thong halfway over her ass. She then bent over and pulled the string of her thong all the way to one side. Her pussy was exposed. She then ripped off the bikini so she was completely naked. Spice laid on the floor and spread her legs so the fans could look inside of her. She grabbed the sides of her pussy with both hands and spread as wide open as she could. Che ran back onto the stage. Che knelt in front of Spice with the water hose and turned it on full blast. She placed the nozzle 1 foot from Spice's open pussy and sprayed it down. Spice wiggled from side to side as the spray tickled her clit. A silence fell over the crowd. They knew it was the best $50 they had ever spent. Spice jammed 2 fingers into her cunt as Che sprayed her down. She worked them in as hard and fast as she could. She then rammed in 2 more. Che leaned over and started to eat out her best friend. That was all Spice could take. She began to scream at the top of her lungs. Then she fell silent. Che dragged her off the stage. Kimberly was the 3rd girl in the contest. She came out wearing a low-cut silk blouse and skin-tight leather pants with a whip. She cracked the whip as she paraded around the stage. She slowly bent over, letting her breast fall out of her top. She had the biggest breast of anybody in the contest, and maybe also the tightest body. She was very confident. Kimberly cracked the whip at the wrestler's entrance, and her husband Diamond Dallas Page walked out. The audience didn't know what to make of this. Kimberly pulled her shirt over her head as Dallas walked towards her. When he reached her, he began to suck on her huge breast. He then pulled down her tight pants. Kimberly dropped to her knees and slid Dallas's pants down around his ankles. She looked deeply into his eyes as she began to stroke his cock. It didn't take long for it to reach its full 8 inches. Kimberly wrapped her thick lips around his fully engorged cock and swallowed it whole. Dallas grabbed her by her long hair and began to fuck her face. The harder he fucked her face, the faster Kimberly bobbed her head up and down on his cock. It was amazing to see. The audience began to clap their approval. Dallas reached down and spun Kimberly around. He bent her all the way over and slammed his cock into her asshole. Kimberly squealed with delight. Dallas gave the symbol of the diamond cutter as he worked his cock in and out of his wife's ass. Kimberly rocked back, matching him stroke for stroke. She was a true athlete. Dallas grabbed her by the hair and yanked back and began to ram her even harder. Kimberly began to scream, "Harder!" Dallas obliged. Kimberly then screamed, "I'm coming!" Dallas then spun her around and shoved his cock down her throat. Kimberly wrapped her lips around his cock as tight as she could, as Dallas began to pump his load down her throat. Kimberly didn't spill a drop. She then held it in her mouth to show the crowd. She then swallowed it down to a standing ovation. She and Dallas then took a bow and left. Daphne was the last contestant. She was the newest member of the Nitro team. so she knew she had to work a little harder. She also knew this was a chance to make some real money and become a major player in the wrestling world. She thought if she won, she could maybe even get out of WCW and go to the WWF. Daphne walked onto the stage screaming and laughing. She was wearing her patented black stretch pants and black t-shirt. She stood giggling, facing the audience. Then she reached up underneath her shirt and began to tweak her nipples. She began to scream louder. She lifted her shirt up, so the bottom half of her breasts were exposed. She then pulled it back down and waved to the crowd. Not yet. She then pulled the top of her shirt down, exposing the top half of the breast, this time exposing a little nipple. The crowd started chanting, "Show your tits!" Daphne then grabbed her shirt with both hands, ripping it right down the middle. Her chest was completely exposed. She began to shake her tits at the audience. Daphne bent over, letting her tits hang low and sway from side to side. That was the advantage of having large, real breasts. They actually moved. Oh, yeah! Daphne then lifted her breast up by the nipples. This was driving the crowd wild. Daphne began to scream and laugh hysterically again. She was having the time of her life. She then sat on the stage and pulled her pants off. They were so tight it was a struggle. But there were plenty of volunteers in the front row, willing to help. Daphne sat cross-legged on the stage, completely naked, still laughing hysterically. She then reached down and put her hand between her legs. She looked up and was silent. She slipped her middle finger inside her cunt and started to coo. It felt good, and she began to slowly work it in and out. She then added a second finger. Daphne was pumping her 2 fingers in and out as fast as she could now. She didn't care about being Miss Nitro anymore. She just wanted to get off. She shoved 2 more fingers into her cunt. She rolled over with her round ass facing the crowd. They started chanting, "Use the thumb!" in unison. Daphne rammed her entire hand into her cunt. She started to laugh and scream hysterically again. She began to turn her hand from side to side. She was working it the best she could, but it wasn't enough for her. She looked up and saw the water bottle that Tori had used laying on the stage. She reached out with her free hand and grabbed it. The crowd began to chant, "Use the bottle! Use the bottle!" Daphne wouldn't disappoint them. She pulled her hand out of her cunt and grabbed the water bottle with both hands. She rammed it into her cunt with a squill. The entire bottle slid easily into her dripping wet cunt. She used both hands to ram it in and out as hard as she could. She had once again stopped screaming. She rocked back and sat the water bottle flat on the ground. She then rose up and started bouncing up and down on it. She was giggling and screaming again. Daphne was slamming up and down on the bottle until she lowered herself all the way to the ground. The bottle disappeared all the way inside of her. She began to come, and the bottle squirted out of her pussy and into the second row. She took a bow and left to a standing ovation. That was the end of the first annual Miss Nitro. All that was left was for the fans to pick a winner. The end. This story is entitled Pass the Gravy, and it was written by WowFA.com user, Innovator of Awesomeness. Trish Stratus, fresh off her successful title defense against Stacy Keibler, steps into her locker room with the smell of gravy emanating from her sexy body. Her horrible stench simply repels her. She stands in front of a full-length mirror, admiring her liquid-soaked frame. It was disgusting. Once long and beautiful blonde hair was now a mess of flocked, indistinguishable hair, filled with a different array of scraps. She quickly flips her hair back, sending gravy and other assorted items burrowing behind her. "Gee, thanks!" A voice resounds from behind Trish. Trish glances in the mirror. Stacy Keibler, the self-proclaimed Duchess of Dudleyville, stands behind her, wiping off remnants of the garbage that Trish had just flung behind her. Stace! I'm so sorry, Trish replies, turning to face her former opposition. She assists Stacy in the removal of the scraps that were propelled from Trish's soaked blonde locks. It's quite alright, Stacy retorts. I was already covered in it anyway. Trish laughs, combing her hair with her fingers. It's amazing the shit they make us do for ratings. Yeah! The slimmer blonde agrees. But ratings should be great after that one. I mean, with my thong showing most of the match, your breasts nearly popping out, and your tight little ass in those black satin panties. Stacy stops. This was far too much detail. She can't believe that she went off on such a tangent about Trish's backside, even though what she said was true.
Fact.
Luckily, Trish either didn't hear the comments or pretended not to. You know, Trish starts. Speaking of my undergarments, Stacy swallows hard. Apparently Trish did hear her ramblings, and just didn't mind, or felt similar feelings. Trish pulls her dress over her head and disregards the soaked clothing. She admires herself in her black satin bra and matching panties, the one Stacy so adequately mentioned. I must have gravy in places I can't even imagine. Standing back, Stacy watches in awe as Trish reaches behind her back, fiddling with her bra strap. This was it. For months, the young Stacy Keibler had admired Trish Stratus from afar. She felt undeniable lust toward the buxom blonde whenever she was around. Stacy was ecstatic each time she heard that the two would tangle in the ring. Not because it was a chance for her to appear on television, but it was a chance for her to get closer to Trish.
Aww.
It was a chance for her to feel those enormous breasts pressed against her slender frame. It was a chance for her to stroke that beautiful blonde hair. It was a chance for her to sense the intriguing aroma that emitted from her crotch. Glancing at the mirror, Trish smiles wickedly as she watches Stacy admire her from a short distance. It was amazing that Keibler hadn't picked up on her subliminal hints. After all, Trish had been fingering her bra strap for a good minute and a half now. Even in their battle, Trish purposely rubbed her body against Stacy's, hoping to spark some sort of action between the two. Alas, she was too young, and thus blind to such latent advances. You want to help me back there? Trish calls back to Stacy, hoping to make her sexual advances a bit more obvious. Oh yeah! Sure! Stacy breaks from her trance and steps behind Trish. Keibler reaches out, her shaking hand slowly approaching Trish's bra strap. This was the moment she had been waiting for months. Finally a chance to see those beauties that kept nudging up against her. Suddenly Trish's hand jolts out, taking a grasp of Keibler's. Her requested action was halted without warning. What's going on? Keibler asks. You told me to. Trish turns and places her index finger across Keibler's satin red lips. Still holding the blonde's hand, Trish leads Stacy across the room toward an awaiting shower stall. Still silent, she presents the stall to Stacy and releases the grasp on her hand. Trish reaches inside and pulls the valve. Steaming hot water emerges from the shower head, barreling toward the tiled floor in an irresistible steam. With their stench and filth, both women were itching for a shower. However, neither imagined it would be together. How about a hot shower? Trish blurts out, breaking her silence. She inches closer to Keibler, with a crafty smile across her face. Stacy's lips part in a reply, but Trish interrupts. She plants her lips against Keibler's, kissing her passionately. At first, Stacy is dazed. She doesn't know what to think of the whole situation. These two could be fired if someone were to find them. Then again, this was her dream, and was an opportunity she didn't want to miss. Full of passion, Keibler bends the blonde back over her knee, and returns the favor. Smothering her lips against Trish's, Trish breaks free of the kiss. Her smile seems to cover her entire angelic face. That a girl! Now, let's jump in the shower while we're still hot. Stacy peels the red and purple sequin dress from her body and lifts it over her head. Trish takes the dripping wet article of clothing in her hands and tosses it aside. She recognizes the familiar bright red thong that the entire crowd had become well acquainted with after their match. However, as she tilts her head upward, she comes across a pair of perky nipples on a pair of even perkier, bra-less breasts. No bra? Trish asks, taking a moment to fondle Keebler's bra-less tits. Each breast more than fits into each of her hands. No wonder you seemed a bit perkier in our match. Yep, Keebler laughs. It was actually not as bad as you'd think. That gravy, as disgusting and horrible as it was, felt wonderful against my breast. Trish ponders. I'll have to try that sometime. Well, Stacy rests her hands on Trish's mammoth breast. Stratus's satin bra felt great against her palms. Practice makes perfect. Trish giggles as she reaches behind her back and unsnaps her bra. Stacy peels away the material and nonchalantly throws it aside. That didn't take you a minute and a half that time, did it? Keebler chuckles. Trish flutters her eyes. So, are you just going to stand there and make me do all the work? Stacy wraps her arms around Trish's slender waist and buries her face in her monstrous cleavage, kissing Trish's breast. Keebler reaches behind and wraps her fingers around the waistband of the blonde's black thong panties. She continues to indulge in Trish's magnificent rack, kissing and licking her hard nipples, while slowly pulling down her panties. Trish steps out of her fallen undergarments and kicks them aside. She lifts Keebler's head from between her breasts and kisses her on the lips. Their tongues wrestle for what seems like hours, intertwining to convert the taste of Trish's lovely breast. Trish parts from Keebler's grip to step inside the shower. Inside the women's locker room, the shower stalls were quite large, enough to fit a few people. The WWF Divas often wondered if Vince's intentions were to have the ladies shower together.
I've got a big surprise for you, for Mr. McDaddy.
However, none of the Divas ever did, until now. The stall was lined completely with tile, and featured a small ledge in the back corner, able to seat someone. Hung from the shower head was a basket containing an oblong bar of soap, a cloth, and a bottle of shampoo. Trish steps beneath the running water and moans as the hot liquid touches her body. Filth immediately drops to the floor in a heap of water and drains from the shower stall. Trish rubs her breast, showing extra attention to her nipples as she tweaks them slightly. She releases a deep and heavy moan as she tilts her head back and shuts her eyes. It felt good to get all of the Thanksgiving garbage off her gorgeous body. Oh! She coos. Stace, this is the greatest feeling in the world. You need to get in here. Stacy wastes no time in dropping her panties and stepping into the shower. Trish steps aside and positions Keebler beneath the steam of hot water. Liquid falls upon Stacy's magnificent frame. Long blonde hair, small perky breast, and moistened crotch with a small patch of hair. Her cuffs definitely match her cufflinks. Gravy nearly covers the tile floor that both ladies stand upon. There is a sense of relief as the women wash away reminiscence of their filth. Now that we're clean, Trish starts, wringing out her hair. I think it's time we have a little fun. She places her hands on Keebler's shoulders and turns her around. Trish kisses the back of her neck, emitting a strain of moans from the Duchess of Dudleyville. Stratus continues, moving down to her knees and kissing Stacy's lower back. Keebler wiggles her cute little butt, hoping to attract her sultry lover. Playfully, Trish slaps Stacy on the ass. Tori was right, she comments. You do have a nice ass. Trish pulls Stacy's butt cheeks apart and slithers her tongue inside. She vigorously licks and lashes at the inside of Keebler's tasty butt. Stacy moans as she reaches behind her back and presses her hands atop Trish's head. She pushes the eager little slut further into her anus, almost smothering her. The WWF Women's Champion never misses a beat, continuing to spit and slobber all along Keebler's puckered hole. "Tastes good too," Trish remarks, lifting her head up. She works her index finger into Keebler's butt to keep her in the mood, for Trish has far more intentions for the slender blonde. Stacy grinds her hips erotically, strumming her damp hair as she moves. Trish feels her finger being forced into Keebler's anus, all the way to the second joint. Stacy moans as she feels her butt being prodded, with each crafty gyration of her hips. "Oh! Trish!" Stacy calls, bending at the waist. "Trish! Slide your finger in and out of my butt! It'll feel so goddamn good!" Trish fulfills her demand, slipping her finger in and out of Keebler's bottom, in smooth, gradual strokes. It did feel great, as the expression of both women's faces could explain. Trish had a devilish smile across her face, as she continues to anally assault her blonde lover. Stacy, on the other hand, seems almost on the verge of orgasm, with her jerking movements. Her eyelids are completely shut, and her pink lips form a slight part in which orgasmic moans escape. She pushes back with full force, driving Trish's finger into her like a nail in a coffin. On her knees, Stratus is almost barreled over by Stacy's sudden movement. Stacy Keebler, with her rapid movements that nearly knocked Trish over, seemed to be controlling this whole sexual adventure. This did not bode well with the WWF Women's Champion, who wasn't afraid to let a younger woman dominate her. She had been having sex well before Keebler, and she was the master at this game. Trish was not about to sit on her knees and take the constant bombardment that Keebler gave to her. After all, this was her idea, not Keebler's. It was time to make the Duchess of Dudleyville her own personal bitch. Trish rises to her feet with a newfound confidence in her eyes. Her finger continues to piston between Keebler's soft butt cheeks. Trish forcefully pushes down on the blonde's lower back, bending her forward slightly more. Stacy's long, sexy legs were now spread even further apart. As a result, her butt cheeks part ever so more. Immediately, Trish forces her finger deeper into Keebler's ass, twisting the entire thing inside her puckered hole. Stacy's moans are ear-piercing. She begs Trish to be gentler, but the focused, boxing blonde continues her heavy backside assault. "Come on, Trish! This really hurts!" Stacy nearly comes to tears as Trish tears into her jiggling ass. "This is for your own good," Trish states coldly. "Trust me, you'll like it soon enough." "You need to relax, bitch." Stacy couldn't believe the way Trish spoke to her. It was degrading, demeaning, cruel, and it definitely turned her on.
Oh, yeah!
She tried to follow her orders and relax her muscles, but Trish's finger was wedged too far for that to happen. Her ass muscles contracted slightly before the far-spread butt cheeks act as a roadblock and close her chances at relaxation. As a last resort, the struggling blonde reached behind her and attempted to pry Trish's finger out of her anus. Quickly, Trish reacted and slapped the diminutive backside of Stacy Keebler. The Duchess of Dudleyville let out a yelp. "You like that, don't you?" Trish asked. Her hand was poised for another spank. "Yes!" Stacy cried out. She knew that if she had denied it, Trish would spank her anyway. Trish slammed her hand down across Keebler's backside, emitting another caterwaul from the Duchess of Dudleyville. She squirmed to avoid further punishment, but Trish was relentless. Her hand struck the delicious backside of Stacy Keebler several more times. each one more unforgiving than the last. It seemed that the more Keebler moved, the harder the shots became. Trish switched to the back of her hand and slapped Keebler on the other side of her ass. Alternating, Trish spanked Stacy with reckless abandon, striking her with the front and back of her hand, on the left cheek and the right cheek. Deep red blotches appeared almost immediately after each strike. Keebler cried out, pleading with Trish to stop. Please, Trish, stop! Stacy cried, almost in tears. Maniacally, the diva laughed and dropped her hand to the side. Stacy sighed in relief, but knew that her ass assault was far from finished. Trish's finger was still wedged pretty deep within her buttocks, which surprisingly, Keebler had forgotten about. She was becoming tolerant to it. Trish continued to piston her finger in and out of the cheeks of Keebler's delightful butt. Stacy moaned in delight, now that she was becoming tolerant to it.
Ah!
It felt as good as she had predicted. Trish sighed, disappointed. Looks like it's time for you to repay me, Trish declared. Her finger slid from Keebler's ass cheeks with a resounding pop. Trish proudly strutted to the opposite side of the shower, shaking her bulbous rump in a sexy sway. She sat down on the triangular piece of tile that jutted out from the wall and spread her legs. Seductively, she ran her fingers over the inside of her legs, enticing the panting Stacy Keebler. Come here! Trish called as she snapped her fingers. Keebler dropped down to her knees and then fell forward on her hands. She crawled along the shower floor to Trish's feet, waving her still sexy, yet beat red ass. Trish received the blonde eagerly and wrapped her legs around Keebler's neck. Stacy buried her face between the diva's thighs, brushing her lips on Trish's sweet pussy. Trish shivered as she felt the cold, wet lips of her blonde, ambitious lover nibble at her moist labial lips. Keebler continued to munch on the tasty treat without remorse. She licked the pink inner walls that lined the honey-laden sex pot, spreading the lips with her crafty tongue. This was driving Trish absolutely insane. Oh yes! Yes! Trish cooed, pressing down on Keebler's head. Give it to me! Keebler reached beneath Trish's seated frame and massaged her rounded butt. As she did so, she continued to munch on the wet pussy that sat between her lips. Trish was amazed that this transformed, eager slut could manage both tasks at once, and do each so well. Stacy seemed content on bringing the lovely diva to an orgasm. Her hands traveled from Trish's smooth rump to her hips. From there, Keebler slid her fingers up to Trish's chest and wrapped her palms around the enormous masses of flesh. She cupped Trish's breast and ran her smooth fingers over the blonde's hardened nipples. Still, the Duchess of Dudleyville never missed a beat downstairs, still furiously tugging at Trish's labia with her teeth. Trish's deep, bellowing moans reached an uncanny height. Her fingers wrapped and tightened around Keebler's, pinning them to her chest. Stace! I'm going to! She panted. Keebler knew this was the beginning of the end. Furiously, she worked at Trish's 2 pleasure points, slipping her tongue in and out her moistened cunt, while kneading her large breast with her hands. Trish couldn't withstand the pleasure for a minute longer. She nearly crushed Keebler's hands beneath her grasp as she came. Stacy devoured the juice that oozed from Trish's contracting hole with pleasure. With one final gulp, Stratus's liquids were completely drained, and Keebler lifted her head up with a smile across her sweet, angelic face. That was amazing! Trish stated, still panting like an animal in heat. I have to admit, you were absolutely wonderful. You were magnificent, Stacy admitted. Those breasts, that pussy, that ass, marvelous. That was definitely better than something any guy in the back could give me. Trish smiled at the compliment. She tapped her thigh with the remaining energy she had left. Keebler lifted herself up off the ground and straddled the WWF diva. Passionately, the 2 locked lips running their hands all over each other's gorgeous bodies. Trish cradled Keebler's soft butt in her hands as she continued to press her lips against the blonde's mouth. Meanwhile, Keebler squeezed Trish's mammoth breast with her small hands as she returned the meaningful lip lock. This, undoubtedly, was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. The end. Thank you for listening to episode 82 of WrestleRotica. We hope that you enjoyed this week's stories. If you enjoyed this week's stories, please be sure to like, review, and subscribe to us in iTunes. Visit us elsewhere online, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, and as always, our official website, WrestleRoticapod.com. Thank you and have a good week.